Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Fifth Avenue Synagogue Sunday evening lecture program. It's wonderful to have you join us once again tonight. Tonight, we have the privilege to hear from Mem Bernstein, the chairman of the AVI CHAI Foundation. The AVI CHAI Foundation is a private foundation endowed in 1984 by Mem Bernstein, a successful investor and founder of Sanford Bernstein. And the foundation aims at strengthening the Jewish people through various educational projects and fostering the bond between the Jewish people and the great state of Israel. Zalman Bernstein was the late husband of Mem Bernstein, our speaker this evening. Lauren Merkin will formally introduce our guest speaker. And Lauren and Ezra, as we mentioned in the past, have both been instrumental in creating our dynamic Sunday night program. We thank both of them for their efforts. Ezra is a Fifth Avenue Synagogue honorary president, and Lauren is the secretary of the board at FAS. And Lauren is also a longtime board member at AVI CHAI. Lauren, of course, has been actively involved at the Fifth Avenue Synagogue for many years. Her parents, who were such wonderful people, were members of the Fifth Avenue Synagogue. We all miss them dearly. Lauren grew up in a home in which the commitment to the local shul was always of paramount importance. And aside from being an extremely pleasant, good-natured, and refined individual, I can attest from firsthand experience that Lauren is someone who is greatly concerned about the needs of others and routinely looks to bring light and warmth into the lives of others in her most modest way. Lauren and Ezra will be guiding this evening's conversation, and we only wish them good health, much success, and great nachas from their beautiful and wonderful family. Lauren?
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you for those very, very sweet words. And to everybody from Fifth Avenue who is out there, I truly miss you, and I very, very much look forward to seeing you in Shul soon, Ezrat Hashem. I have known Mem Bernstein for 3 decades. She is one of the most gracious people I know. Pre-COVID, if you bumped into Mem in the street and said hello, she would almost certainly invite you for Shabbat dinner in her beautiful home in Jerusalem when next you were there. Mem is at home anywhere, but she actually lives on 2, often 3 continents. In the United States, in New York and Hawaii, Jerusalem and Australia. Her life is focused on her family, 3 children and many grandchildren, and her philanthropic work. Mem has published 2 books, The Aging Parent in You and The Sandwich Generation. If we are lucky and God willing, one day she will publish another book, giving her unique, youthful, and optimistic perspective on the aging parent. Mem has spoken sweetly about her origins. Quote, I grew up in the Bronx. My father started out as a taxi driver, and later he and my mother bought a toy store. No, not Toys R Us. My parents were simply hardworking people. I didn't go to day school, but my parents instilled in me a sense of the beauty of Judaism, a commitment to tradition, and most importantly, a love for family, which I largely learned from the way my parents lived. You see, I grew up in an apartment building with my grandparents, 2 aunts and 2 uncles, 4 cousins, all of whom kept a kosher home, lit Shabbat candles, and changed the dishes for Passover. Tonight, Mem will focus primarily on her perspective on her philanthropic work. She's a trustee of the Tikva Foundation and Karen Ketchet, and chair of the AVI CHAI Foundation, which wound down in January of this year, but remains very active through Beit AVI CHAI in Jerusalem, a center for the creation and expression of Jewish and Israeli culture and education. I am honored and delighted to introduce my mentor and close friend, Mem Bernstein. So let's just go to the questions. You've been involved with 3 major charitable organizations, Mem, the AVI CHAI Foundation, Karen Keshet, and the Tikva Fund. I just lost my visual. Is that me or you?
We can see you, Lauren.
Okay, so I can't, okay. I lost Mem. Looking across the range of experiences you've had with those organizations, what were one of the two projects that in retrospect most justified the expenditure of time, money, and effort, and why?
I see we're starting with the easy questions first.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's see. I certainly can give you two, but I think I'd rather give you three because you'll understand better when you talk about the expense of time, money, and effort. The three that I would choose are the AVI CHAI Film and Television Program Project, Tablet, the online journal, that's a Karen Keshet project, and the Keshet School in Jerusalem, which is both, and interestingly, an AVI CHAI and Karen Keshet project. And I'll explain why. You know, you have to ask yourself, first of all, what your objective is, how much you're prepared to spend, how many people you hope to touch, and what the result of that touch would be. So film and television, if I could back up for a minute, you know, when AVI CHAI started working in the film and television media industry in the late 1990s, all that you saw on the screen was primarily white, Ashkenazi, and secular. You never saw any representation of the many cultures that made up Israeli society. And today, we've changed that industry because we had a significant role in bringing religious characters and Sephardi characters and Jewish culture to the screen on primetime television and in Israel in documentaries and feature films. So what you see there is an enormous change in what you see on the screen. And hundreds, if not thousands, if not millions of people get to see our films over the fullness of time. And even though we have only invested 20% of any film, we have had the fabulous opportunity of having someone with whom we work, Suri Drucker, be our consultant. And when our committee met in Jerusalem, as we did, we were made up of a group of people. Am I rambling on about this?
No.
Okay.
Perfect.
Okay, so we were made up of a group of people that represented Ashkenazim, Sephardim, Israelis, Americans, men and women, and pretty much an age range. And so when we came to the table and read a script, many of the questions that we posed to Suri, who then went back to the producers or directors with, then were able to be adjusted accordingly because they were interested in our messages to them and interested in the knowledge that this committee had, because, you know, our Israeli trustees who sat on the committee, Avital Darmon and Meir Bazaglo, are incredibly well connected. They're Israeli from birth, as are their families, and they knew the insides and outsides of many of the scripts that came to us. And so the producers and directors had a great interest and were interested in knowing, and they adjusted their films. As a matter of fact, one of the things that we had in our contracts was that we always had the right to take our name off a film. But the truth is, in all of the years, I'm talking 20 years now, we've only ever once taken our name off a film. And that was because at the end, when we got to see what the film turned out to be, we still weren't happy enough with the quality of goodness in one of the characters. So, okay, so that was a project that has enormous influence. Now you can see our films all over the world, and certainly the television and documentary and screen film business has changed enormously as a result of what we added to the screen, the diversity that we added to the screen. So that was one project. Karen Keshet, the tablet online journal, has a tagline. And that tagline is a new read on Jewish life. And so through that lens, a Jewish lens, the articles that we offer up every day encompass everything from news, arts and letters, Israel and the media, Israel and the Middle East, food, holidays, community, history, science, sports, everything with the Jewish lens that resonate with the Jews. And again, it's not uncommon that you would find 20,000, 30,000, 40,000 people reading one of our articles. So when you look at that, you have to say there's great breadth in disseminating information. Now, you take those two projects, media and written material, and you say to yourself, how much impact can that actually have over the fullness of time? It's hard to know. But now, the Keshet School in Jerusalem is a secular and religious school of students that study together. Now, I don't know if many people know this, but in Israel, when you go to school, you determine the track that you want to learn in before you enter. And so you either choose a religious track or a secular track. There was no religious secular combined track that you could go to. And a woman named Ruthie Lahavi, Salman had met her many, many years ago now, and she had an idea for one school that had dual teaching in each classroom for religious and secular kids to study together. And the city gave her a building. Salman gave her a stipend to write up what she wanted to do for a year. And a year later, she came back with this idea. And so for the last, well, it must be 25 years now, students have been studying in this school. So what did that mean? It was in an old building. Kids came, they started kindergarten first, second, third. Every year another grade grew. And every year we helped to support that school because the city only put in the amount of money that they would for a track, but we had a dual track. And so we continued to fund it until they were up through and running 12th grade, and for several years after that. And then Karen Keshet bought a building for them in Old Katamon and built the school that school, kindergarten through 12th grade, is housed in now. And there are over 800 students. So you have to look at that and say, for the amount of money that went into that project, over the fullness of time, what you have are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of students studying for years, religious and secular together. The impact of that has to be far greater than the thousands who read an article or the thousands, even millions who see a film. So how do you determine the best use and the best time spent? So those are three projects that will give you a sense of the vast differences between projects and the things you have to consider. So 3 was the best I can do for you.
Since you singled out those 3 projects, I wonder whether they also are a window into what makes you love what you do?
Oh, Lauren, you should know the answer to that. What makes me love what I do first is the people with whom I work. I love my people. I have been blessed with really a board of trustees and a staff that I've never seen anywhere else. They're committed, they're intelligent, they love what they do. So when every day in an office with these kinds of people is just enervating. I mean, you can't take enough of it. So that for sure is the first thing. And the second thing that I love is I love the diversity. You know, business is more my background. And although this is a business because it's the business of philanthropy, the diversity of it is fantastic. Everything from, as I said, film and television to book writing, to curriculum writing, to anything you can think of and in between. So the diversity of knowing that every day you come into the office, you don't know what you're going to be doing, but you're never going to be bored and you're never going to have enough time to finish anything. I think it's very stimulating and very exciting. And look, we've been very fortunate, as you know, Lauren, because you sat on the board longer than I've sat on the board. It's amazing when you meet people who know you and know about what you've done. To hear them talk about you meaning the foundation, is exceptional. It's exceptional. I mean, I haven't ever been anywhere, except maybe with some of my kids, where I've been criticized in that regard. So yeah, I think it's been an exciting and wonderful experience for me.
Well, I certainly did share that experience. And if I could ask you something that we didn't mention, but you call yourself a venture philanthropist. What is a venture philanthropist?
Well, I don't know what they had in mind, but I can tell you what I am. You know, as you know, every board member who came to AVI CHAI was interviewed by all of the other board members first. I was never interviewed by anyone because Zalman gave me his seat. And I always wondered as I first came in those first years, what was I going to offer this foundation or any of the foundations? But interestingly enough, I've always been what I consider, I don't know what others would consider of me, but I consider myself to be a creative thinker. And although I have failed at some of my creations, largely they've been good. I mean, think back, Lauren, I think one of the first things that I brought to the table was Baba Ganoush, which I thought was a fabulous idea. And it was, but it was just too costly to work out in the end. But that's the kind of thing that I do. The whole next book project, all of the ideas, I might not be somebody who can touch on a project and say, this is what it should be, but I can certainly look at something and read enough and figure out what's missing or what needs tweaking. And I've been very fortunate. Many of the things that I've thought about and tweaked have come to be good. You know, when Zalman was alive and before I was involved with the foundation, I don't know if you know this, he would bring home questions. And he would ask me my opinion or what I thought, and I had no idea that any of this was on the table at AVI CHAI. But when I got to AVI CHAI and I looked at a lot of these projects, I was surprised to see that certainly not all, but much of what I had suggested came to the fore. I don't know if you remember when the two Elizas were hired for Tzav Pius. So Zalman came home and said, you know, I've interviewed two wonderful women and I don't know which one to hire. Take a look at their CVs and let me know. And I looked at it and I said to him, you know, this isn't a job for one person. This is a job for two people because they've got to be able to bounce the ideas off one another. It's otherwise going to be lonely and too stiff a project. And he hired both of them, but I never knew that. And so a lot of that sort of thing was going on. I guess I was being interviewed in advance of.
Right.
Yeah, it was good.
You passed the muster.
I did.
So,
I guess I did. Yeah.
What inspired the creation of AVI CHAI, and what was its first grant? And when AVI CHAI started, did they focus on individuals, institutions? How did, you know?
Well, I don't, you know, I have to say, I don't really know what AVI CHAI's first grant was because I wasn't around for that. I only came into the foundation in 1999, but I know that the first grant for a project or a conference was the Rav Kook conference, if you recall. I don't know, were you around then?
I don't think so, actually.
Okay,
not.
so at the very beginning, that might not have been the first grant, but it was certainly the first project. And as most of your listeners would know, Rav Kook was the first Ashkenazi chief rabbi in the pre-state of Israel, and he was considered the father of religious Zionism. He seemed to be able to synthesize Torah study and Jewish nationalism, and he was a visionary and a realist and a man who stood alone, and yet he was a spiritual leader of thousands of people. So I think that Zalman was intellectually drawn to that kind of leader and that kind of thinking. And I think he wished the foundation to be directed with those goals of Torah study and nationalism in mind. So I think that's what he wanted the foundation to be. I think he came to it as a result of his own life experience, in that he, although he was raised in what I sort of gleaned to be a traditional Jewish home, once he said Shiva for his father and then said Kaddish for him, and met Rabbi Riskin and started studying with Rabbi Riskin, his life changed until 15 years later, he became a Shomer Shabbat Jew. And I think he was eager to share that joy that he had experienced in that journey with other people. And I think that's how it evolved.
Okay.
Did I answer that whole question?
Yeah, I think you did.
Okay, good.
But we were just asking, I mean, I was curious, when it started, did it focus on individuals or always on groups of people?
Yeah,
or?
Right. Well, like I say, I wasn't there at the beginning, but I do know that for the first 10 years of the foundation, they were, I hate to use the word floundering, but they were experimenting. That's a better word. They were experimenting with what they wanted to do. And so they were all over the place. I can't say to you what happened at that time, but I know that we at AVI CHAI had to rely both on institutions and individuals. I mean, we worked with, for example, Pardes and JTS and YU, as you know, and HUC, but then there were people because we're not an operating foundation, we had to find others to do the jobs we wanted done. And so through those institutions, we were able to do that. But they had to rely on people in the field. So it's always a people business. But for us, there was also the opportunity where I said before that Ruthie Lahavi wrote a plan for this religious secular school, the Keshet School. There were also people like Hila Kobliner or Tova Shimon, who wrote the curriculum for Aitalam and help me, Lauren. Aitalam and
no, that's it.
No, what was Aitalam was elementary school.
Oh, you're talking about the high school curriculum.
What was the name of it?
I forget.
Me too. I'm so glad you forgot. I thought it was only me. Good.
It'll come to me in a minute.
I know, me as well.
I'm getting to that aged parent category very, very fast.
You know, that was interesting what you said. I never thought to write a book about myself as an aging parent, but I like that. I think I might have to think about that.
Well, you should definitely do it.
I think I should.
Yeah, you'll find a
right.
bunch of
anyway,
readers.
So anyway, in answer to your question, both individuals and organizations, because we could not have done what we did without organizations, because as I said, we were not an operating foundation. We didn't have a staff of people to carry out these jobs. We were sort of the back office for them.
Right, or the funder.
Yeah, well, definitely.
Funder and oversight.
But the back office, because we were the creators, if you remember in the early days, it was a trustee and a staff person who created. The trustee came with an idea, worked with the staff person, an idea was created and formed, and then you had to go out and find an organization that would carry it out for you.
Right. Yeah. Yes?
Ez, got a question for me, Ezra?
Mrs. Bernstein, I thank you for putting up with all of us this evening. You were talking a little bit about early days, trying to find your way, there not being a map. If there was, you didn't have a compass. And in thinking about the sense of inclusiveness, Pardes, YU, JTS, HUC, and I say this from the perspective of an AVI CHAI spouse, which is a rather distinctive category. And so you hear smatterings of conversations and you don't always get the full conversations, although as you know, AVI CHAI has been a source of enormous personal friendships for Lauren and me, and for that matter, for our kids. So the phrase religiously purposeful is a phrase that I did not hear of before either hearing it or reading it in AVI CHAI literature. And I wonder to what extent religiously purposefulness serves as a real departure point for AVI CHAI as it begins to look at projects. I don't necessarily mean way back at the Rav Kof conference, which I actually happened to be in Jerusalem for. I remember Rav Mital's presentation. Can you give us a sense of what that means, religious purposefulness, and how it serves AVI CHAI, what that characterizing question is intended to accomplish?
Yes, but I'd like to step back just a bit to say that religious purposefulness fell into place after we did a real in-depth look at ourselves to determine what it was we wanted to portray and what it was we wanted to accomplish. And we came up with three things, what we lovingly refer to as LRP. L, literacy, meaning Jewish literacy. R, religious purposefulness, what you speak of. And P, promoting of advocacy for Jewish people and Israel. Now, if you had asked me about Jewish literacy, that would have been easy. We all know what literacy is, and Jewish literacy is not so difficult to understand either, nor is the promotion of advocacy for the Jewish people. But it's interesting that you asked me about religious purposefulness, because for myself, I find that a most compelling question. I'll explain. For most Orthodox people, they know what religious purposefulness is. They know they daven, they know they keep kosher, they know their Shomer Shabbat, they know the prayers, they know when it's Yom Gedalia, and they know when it's Yom Kippur, and they know everything they have to do, and they are well educated and they are literate, and they live by the rules. Anyway, maybe most of them try to live by the rules, but I consider myself a flexidox person, not Orthodox, not conservative, flexidox. And so for me, religious purposefulness is a little harder to define because I'm not sure many people would accept it as a definition. But my life is Jewish. Everything about my life is Jewish. My family life is Jewish. My children were raised Jewishly. From the time they were little kids, Jewish was going on in our home, whether it be people coming to the house or my first husband and I discussing the Jewish community. So for me, a purposeful life is a Jewish life. That might not be good enough for people who are to the right of me, but it works for me. And when I look at my children today, they are all involved in some ways Jewish. My grandchildren are Jewish day schools largely. So I think that's what it means. I'm not sure I can more clearly define it unless you ask me more specific questions.
Well, it sounds like you're explaining what religious purposefulness means to you, which is a very important question and answer.
Right.
I am curious to know what a flexodox means to you and whether it means the same thing to your children and your grandchildren, and whether it means the same thing, and this is a bit of a departure, in your mind's eye for men and for women. And I still want to retrieve the question of what does religious purposefulness mean, not only to Mem Bernstein, but what does it mean to AVI as it begins to sort out its challenges?
Okay, so for AVI, it meant what it intended to do, as our mission statement says, to encourage those of Jewish faith toward a greater commitment to Jewish observance, as I said, lifestyle by increasing their understanding, their appreciation, and their practice of Jewish traditions, customs, and laws. That's what they wanted to accomplish. They also wanted to accomplish a better mutual understanding and sensitivity among Jews of different religious backgrounds and commitments. So that's what the foundation wanted to do. When I look at my family, what does it mean by flexodox? There were times in my life with my family that I had some kids who were Shomer Shabbat and some kids who weren't Shomer Shabbat. I had some kids who would celebrate one holiday, but not all the holidays. And so wherever I was, that's how I lived. If I was in a home of a child observing a holiday in a particular way, that's how I would live it. If I had to drive to get to another kid for another observance of something, I would. So that's how I consider, you know, flexodox, right?
It's not interesting. All right, interesting. You've spoken a lot about AVI and to some extent assumed that everybody listening in is conversant with some of AVI's activities, its primary focus, its objectives, its ideals. We should perhaps step back a little bit and, if you can, give people a sense of, let's say, in addition to LRP, what were the primary focuses of AVI, let us say, here in the States and in Israel? You had very, very defined ideas. You didn't just sort of spray a target. You really took very careful aim before you began to endorse and underwrite. And perhaps give us a little bit of a sense of the scale of these things financially in terms of the size of some of these commitments, unless we touch upon issues that are sort of, I don't want to ask indiscreet questions or provoke indiscreet answers, but just give a sense of the sheer breadth of what you did while still maintaining a very, very tight focus.
So a few things. First of all, everything that I would say to you is public knowledge. Anyone can go online and find out about everything we do, everything we spend, and who we give it to. So that's not any problem.
Well, it's good we got flexodox. I assume flexodox.
There you go. Right, the foundation's flexodox, right? Right. So, okay. The foundation basically worked in 3 locales: America, Israel, and the former Soviet Union. But as I said before, in the first 10 years, they were sort of all over the place, had not yet gone to the former Soviet Union, had only just come into Israel. But in the last 20 years, we have been solidly in those 3 locations all of the time. And our objectives were a little bit different in each place. Underlying themes the same, but objective a little bit different. In America, we focused primarily on Jewish day schools and Jewish overnight summer camps. So what does that mean, Jewish day school? If you can envision a building standing there, you could say to yourself, oh, AVI funded an interest-free loan for the restoration of that building or the renovation of that building or the addition to that building. If you opened up the door and walked into the school, you might say, oh, AVI CHAI funded the program that the head of this school went to for years at Harvard University to learn to be a better headmaster at the school. Or you might walk into a classroom and say, this teacher was mentored by a program that AVI CHAI funded for mentoring of teachers. Or you might say the curriculum that they're using now is written by AVI CHAI, funded by AVI CHAI to be written. So it was everything that encompassed, or you might even say, you know, this wonderful celebration of Israel's Independence Day was funded by a grant from AVI CHAI. Or as Lauren knows, you might say, because this is one of her projects, when a kid came into a high school, a Jewish high school that would come from an elementary school that was not a Jewish school, he or she received a complimentary box of books as a starter library for them, the Jewish canon, so to speak. So everything that you could think of in Jewish day schools, that's what we focused on in America. Jewish summer camping, the same sort of thing. You would look at a summer camp and you would say the same thing. Has that summer camp had those additional beds built this year with an interest-free loan from AVI CHAI? Has that camp director been funded, his knowledge of the programming been funded by an AVI CHAI program? Have all of the what do you call it, counselors, have all of the counselors who are they all cornerstone counselors? What's a cornerstone counselor? Cornerstone counselor is someone who continues to return and has been educated by programs of AVI CHAI to add the Jewish content to these Jewish summer overnight camps. So that was our great focus in America. In Israel, we focused on something that we termed, nobody ever liked the term, but we termed it Jewish renewal. It was basically education. The kinds of education that you do through programming, which you would do, you might see today. I'm trying to think of where you would get it today. You could hear a lecture. You could go to a series of lectures where a group of 20 people adults would sit around for weeks on end, months on end, years on end, studying together, every week studying together. So the focus there was more on, I would have to say, adult Jewish learning. And although we tried in many ways to get into the school system, the Keshet School was a great success of ours, and a few more schools popped up like it. We worked at that. But I would say primarily Jewish renewal was the focus in Israel. In the former Soviet Union, it was interesting. It was sort of an overlapping of many of our projects. For example, in America, I mentioned Tablet Magazine. In Russia, you had a similar one, and it was called, what was it called?
And it had a website.
Yeah, .ru. Oh my God, it's been too long now, 2 years, and everything resolved. I can't remember.
George should be here.
I know, it'll come to me. But anyway, it had a similar thing in Russian.
The other thing was Neta.
Yes, Neta, that's right. Okay. The other Israel Hebrew language program for high school students in America was called Neta. But anyway, so they mimicked the same thing that we had done here in America, but it was for the Booknik, that's what it's called.
Booknik, yes.
Right. So Booknik is tablet gone Russian, but of course different in its content, but the concept was there. We also worked in Jewish summer camps in Russia in the same way that we trained teachers and trained counselors, we trained them there in Russia. We also worked, the system was different in Russia. So although we wanted to educate the students in schools, we would go into secular schools and do Jewish studies in the secular schools. Or we would do, in a Jewish school, we would put in the enhanced Hebrew language programs. So it was similar, but a little bit different. And that's what the foundation's focuses were. Always on Jewish, always on literacy, always on purposefulness, always on peoplehood, Jewish.
When you talk about those carefully defined and very, very carefully adhered to focuses or foci here in the States and in Israel and in the former Soviet Union, and as people beginning to take first steps in their charitable giving on whatever scale, do you recommend as narrow a tight as a focus? Are there things that you think your narrow and tight focus, I suppose, inevitably missed, but do you think that in the end, that's the way to go?
Only if you want to actually do something, yes. Look, first of all, we were committed to the mission of my late husband. He set out an agenda for us, but there are many things that come across your desk that you're very eager to do. They don't fall exactly in line of your target, but you're very eager to do them. And there are many things that fall way outside of the realm, and they're exciting. And there's a lot of wonderful stuff going on in the world, but you can't do everything. And unless you're prepared to focus and drill down and stick with it for a long period of time, depending on how much funding you have, I don't think you really can accomplish much. I'm sorry I didn't answer the question for you, but I'll go back. You know, in our last 20 years, AVI CHAI was spending $55 to $60 million a year on the programs in Israel and America and the former Soviet Union. It wasn't divided up equally, of course. The bulk, well, I would say 50% of it came to America and 40% of it, or 45% to Israel and the rest of the former Soviet Union. But you can't do and spend enormous sums of money unless you're prepared to really stick with it. You can't just sprinkle your money around and expect to effect a change. Even with the sums of money we spent, and even over the fullness of time that we spent it, it's hard to know what the future will bring. You know, we talk at AVI CHAI about having created what we hope will be the energizing nucleus of the Jewish people going forward. That's what we hoped. Now, that's not going to be an enormous number of people, but it has to be enough to carry on the Jewish community, and we hope that we were successful at it. So yes, I think if you really want to get anything done, you have to focus. Now, if we had 100 million or $1 billion a year to spend, which some foundations do, then perhaps you can focus on more than 2 objectives, maybe 3, maybe 4, maybe 5, I don't know. But with the amount of money that we had and the time period we had within which to spend it, yes, I definitely think that focusing was very, very important for us.
Okay. Jacob, you were going to ask something?
Yeah, so Mem, I'm curious if at AVI CHAI, did people always come to you, or did you go seek people out? Sounds like you had a specific mission in a couple of boxes. I'm just curious how that process evolved.
Well, not any one of the foundations, I repeat, none of the foundations accepted requests for grants. So no one ever came to us. Wow. However, we had people out there, our trustees were out there, our staff was out there. And so we knew what was going on. And we then came up with ideas that we wanted to see come to fruition. So we went out to people. The only time we ever really, I won't say we accepted requests for grants, but toward the end of the foundation's life, before it spent down, we started partnering. And we started partnering with other foundations because, oh my gosh, stop me if I'm rambling on.
No.
Okay, the foundation decided to spend down the bulk of its funding, its funds, at the end of December 2019. And they decided to stop its grant making. And so I lost my train of thought, but I'll be right back.
You were talking about partnering with other foundations.
Right. So we employed Joel Fleischman to chronicle our spend down. Because when we went to Joel, he was a professor at Duke, and someone, Arthur Freed, who was my partner in the Philanthropies. More
important, Joel's a member of Fifth Avenue. So
okay, so then everyone knows him. Good, that makes life much easier. Okay. So I went to Joel and asked him to chronicle our spend down so that the field would have something to look at, because at the time we decided to spend down was in 2004 or 5. We went to seek other foundations' spend downs to see what we had to do, and there was nothing. I think the Biden Foundation was one foundation that had spent down, but they only went into business to spend down. They were in for 10 years and out. And so there was nothing. So we asked Joel to chronicle our spend down. And the first year he came back to us and he said, look, you are a go it alone foundation. You do what you want to do, you fund what you want to fund, and you're on your own. But in order to spend down in the hopes that the projects that you've started will continue on after you, you have to have partners. That was very difficult for us to hear and not easy for us to adhere to, because partnerships mean that you have to compromise. Exactly. Now, we were only prepared to go so far in our compromising, but we did. And so I could say to you, that's sort of like receiving a request for a proposal, but it wasn't, because people already knew. We were up and running for 20 years, and people already knew what it was we were doing. And so they wouldn't come to us unless they knew it would fall into our slots of interest. And so we started working with them. And that's the only time that we really ever encountered what you would term as a request for a proposal.
So just to follow up to Ezra's question earlier, so if you came into AVI CHAI, you ran it for X amount of years very successfully. If you were starting something now, let's say someone asked you to start a new AVI CHAI or whatever the name is, would you focus on what you have been focusing, or would you do something different? I'm looking for your advice, being in philanthropy, you and Lauren, and for so many years, sort of, where's the next 20 to 30 years that you feel are the most, vital areas to invest in?
Well, first I have to tell you, I never ran anything. If it wasn't for the trustees and staff of AVI CHAI, Karen Kesher, or Tikva, I would not be on the map, because nobody runs anything. They all run everything. But thank you anyway. It's an interesting question. I'll tell you why it's interesting. Because for all the years that we were working with AVI CHAI, and all the years that we were confined by our mission, we never involved ourselves in anything like the secular side of a Jewish education at a Jewish day school. Now, with that in mind, when you look forward at the Jewish community today, and by the way, I would only invest in Jewish. So when you look at the Jewish community today and you ask yourself, what is it that you want to invest in? Knowing everything is a risk, knowing that you can't know the outcome before you spend the money, and knowing how much money you have to spend, then you look at it and you say to yourself, from modern Orthodox to the right, they're your guaranteed Jewish community. Even if people drop out, they're your guaranteed Jewish community. Everything to the left of that is the wishing Jewish community. You wish they would be there. You wish they'd be involved. You wish they'd be more knowledgeable, but there's no guarantee. So for the years working with AVI CHAI, I would have liked to have better educated, secular, religious, ultra-religious, even Haredi community, better better educated, secularly educated. So I would focus still on the religious community because there's better certainty there. I would deep dive again. I might, as I said, consider the secular knowledge that I believe will have to go into that community in order for them to be able to make a difference when the time that time that they'll be called on. And there will be a time that they will be called on.
So just to be clear, not to interrupt you, but because I've heard this from another philanthropist that I admire, but what you're saying, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't want to twist your words, in the Haredi world or in the religious world, let's say, there are a lot of people that would like to be educated and they don't have the funds to go to college, etc. And it sounds, is that what I'm hearing you say, or am I twisting your words?
Twisting just a little bit. Okay. Let's start with day schools. The Haredi community has day schools. I mean, all the kids go to day school, but their secular education is not good enough, in my opinion. Okay. Not that I've done a study of it, but in my opinion, it's not good enough. So that could be advanced and should be advanced. And then anything beyond that, college as well. But I'm talking about those years that I know anything about, the school years, kindergarten through 12. Those years have to be better. and whatever, in any aspect, whether it be lecture series, cultural events, whatever it is, I think that's the community to focus on.
That's fascinating. Thank you for sharing that. That's very helpful for me. Ezra, Lauren?
Yeah, it's a little bit of a jump, but I think it kind of fits in here. You talked at the beginning about, you know, Avi Chai's accomplishments in film and television, and then talked interestingly about what Jewish renewal is in Israel. My sense a little bit is that that the Avi Chai focus on Jewish renewal in Israel came a little bit later than some of its original programs in Israel. And at some point earlier, there was a great deal of focus on efforts to promote mutual tolerance between observant and non-observant Jews. More narrowly, and listening to you talk about the Haredi community, I would love to spend 3 minutes on Shtisel and get a sense from you as to what you think it accomplished, what you think, as I like to say, you did for the Haredi community and what the Haredi community did for you. And were you surprised at those achievements? And did they, in some sense, really push forward, I'm not so sure religious renewal, it might have inspired some religious renewal, but certainly tolerance?
Well, first of all, I hope everybody saw that on Thursday night, the first episode of season 3 of Shtisel, after waiting 5 years for it, came out. And they did an event, a virtual event at Temple Emmanuel. Again,
and it came out in America, Mem?
Yes, well, it came out on, well, Temple Emmanuel had an event for the first episode, and it was on Thursday night.
The first episode of season 3 of Shtisel, just to be clear. I thought it was the first episode of season 3.
Right.
Right. I thought what was interesting about that timing is that both last week, but mostly next week, just a small detail is in the weekly Torah reading is where the phrase Avi Chai is read and comes from. And it's all sort of seasonal. Just as we were turning the corner on Avi Chai, up popped season 3 of Shtisel.
Right, exactly. Very well planned. God had something to do with it, not me. Right. But let me say this. Like I said,
he may be laughing. He may think that, you know, Shtisel at Temple Emmanuel is the expression of Avi Chai.
That's right. But there you go. Shtisel at Temple Emmanuel is exactly what Avi Chai wanted. So it's fabulous. It's true. So let me say this. I'm not sure I remember the question, but I'm going to answer it anyway.
Sure.
Shtisel was a great surprise. Firstly, it came, well, let me back it up a bit again. We tried, as I said, to broaden the base of different sects of the Israeli community. And one of the shows that we had no funding in was Shrugim, about a group of Orthodox young people in Jerusalem who were in the shidduchim business. You know, they wanted to meet boys and girls, that kind of thing. And it didn't come to us. It never came to us because they didn't need funding, but it was wonderful and a smashing success. And we loved it. Then there was a program called Meirav Yerushalmi, which was again a family situation in Jerusalem where you had not a Haredi family, but a traditional family. And that one we were one of the funders of, and again, a very successful show. When Shtisel came to us in the beginning.
Which was when, Mem, if you remember?
Oh, well, I'll tell you, it had to be 10 to 15 years ago. Yeah, because first of all, it takes about 5 years from the time we get a script until it shows, it's almost 5 years. I often don't remember what it was we funded when we get to see it because it's been so long. But anyway, after the first season, we were in for the second season. It was successful. It was in Israel. We thought it was terrific. Second season came, second season went. We said to the producers and directors, let's do a third season. And they said, sorry, but you know, we're really not interested. And the actors have gone off to do other projects and the producers and the directors have as well. And you know, we were novices in this field. And so in spite of thinking that we knew everything, we knew nothing. And the idea that your crew, your producers and directors of a successful show could go off and leave you high and dry was just an anathema to us. But they did. And so there was nothing. But then Shtisel was sold to Netflix and came to the world. And America went nuts over it. They just thought it was fantastic. It was an enormous surprise to us, and a delight because we thought it was great. But they really thought it was terrific here. And shortly after that, they came back to us, the crew, the staff, the directors and producers, and said, would you fund us? We want to do a third season. And of course we jumped at the chance, and we did. But do I think it was an eye-opening experience? Yes, I do. I think for most people who don't really get to see the Haredi community as real people, as people who go deal with the same issues that we deal with, maybe to a different degree, but it's a family and everyone has something in it. You know, when you look at the screen, I think you relate to people in a way that makes you think about yourself and think about others. You talk to your friends about it, and it broadens you. So yes, I think that giving Israel as well as America an opportunity to look at the Haredi community was a wonderful gift and a terrific show. And the first episode of this third season was very surprising. So, and surprising and interesting, and I can see a direction in which they're going. So I certainly highly recommend everybody watching it.
Okay, thank you. You have any idea how many episodes in the third season?
Say that again?
You have any idea how many episodes there are in the third season?
Oh, I'm sure, well, they're still working. I'm sure there'll be at least 10. There usually are about 10, but I don't remember.
Okay.
Ma'am, I was going to ask you some more questions about Tikva and other things, but I'd rather just go to two more sort of personal questions.
Sure.
One is, have you had mentors in your career as a venture philanthropist?
Might have been fun to have been a venture capitalist.
I'm sure you would have been great at it.
Right. Look, you know that Arthur Freed has been my mentor from the minute Zalman died. Arthur, for your audience who might not know, Arthur was
also a member of Fifth Avenue Synagogue.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Yes.
Arthur was a managing partner at Lehman Brothers, who then moved his family to Israel, where he took on the role as the executive director of the Rothschild Foundation. And he was there for 18 years when Zalman died. And he and Zalman had agreed that Arthur would give up his professional career and come to AVI CHAI and be the chairman. Zalman gave the chairmanship over to Arthur. And in the bylaws, it said that I was to be the chairman after Arthur, which would have been 10 years later. It turned out to be 7, but it would have been 10 years later. And Arthur said to me within the first 6 months of our working together, he said, you know, I'm not going to be happy having a chairman in waiting for the next 10 years. So we're going to work together. Now, I have to tell you, when Zalman died and Arthur became chair, the first thing I thought about was, well, I was his wife. Why aren't I going to be the chair? And then I started working. And then I was so happy that I wasn't the chair, because I had no earthly idea of the responsibility that had been put in my hands, and it was enormous. But Arthur is a fantastic mentor. And I'll tell you, I wouldn't have known this, but I know now, because I've been mentored for the last 20 years, and please God, it should go on for another 20. Arthur never said to me, do you know? Never said, do you know? He always said, and you know that. Now, there's a very slight difference in do you know and you know that. But and you know that gives you a sense of you're not stupid, so you don't have to say, no, I didn't know. Gives you a sense of he thinks you do know, though he knows you don't. And helps to build your confidence around all the things that you really don't know that you do have to learn. And I had an enormous amount to learn. Look, I am not a professional lawyer, which Arthur is. I am not a professional accountant, which Arthur is. I have not been in the business of philanthropy as Arthur had for 18 years. I had been, you know, as they say, a community leader when I lived in California. Of course, I was on the Federation boards and I did all of that. But there was no comparison. And so I had to learn everything from how to speak to an employee. I had never employed anyone like that. You know, when you're a volunteer, you think you can say anything and do anything, and you know, everything is wonderful. You're a volunteer, they think you're great. But when you're an employer, it's very different when you're an employee and an employer. And so I had a lot to learn, and he was amazing, I think, an amazing teacher. And from the day we started working together, we worked in an office where we faced one another at one desk. So I got to hear everything. And you know, I was eager to please. I wanted to get it right. I worked very hard at it. I remember thinking the smallest things, you know, if I had to look up a phone number, I remember making a note of that number so I'd never have to look it up again. I always wanted to have the answer ready. I can't imagine, I really can't, what it would have been like had he not been there for me. I can't imagine. So yes, I did have a great mentor.
Do you involve your children in your own philanthropy?
No. The children are not involved in any of our foundation's work. That stemmed from a beginning when Zalman did not want any family members in his business and did not want any family members in his philanthropy. But each one of my children and his children have their own philanthropic foundations. Now, as I said before, my children have known my life's Jewish goals and desires since they were eating pablum. Nothing was hidden from them. Mm-hmm. And so they knew what, I suppose they knew what was expected of them. So they have their own foundations and they can do what they want as long as it's Jewish. And they often, not always, often talk with me about what they're doing or what they want to do, or they want my advice, or they want to hear what I have to say. They don't always take my advice, but they listen. I am happy with each one of my children's choices and what they do. They are all different. They're all Jewish, but they're different. And look, my children are not babies. My children are late 40s, early 50s, and they've been around this world for a very long time. And so they know what to do, and I respect what they do. They're my children. I don't always agree with them, but I can't say that they don't do good. They do good. So, yeah.
So if I could throw in one question that was not on anything that we ever discussed, what do you think of the recent gift by Mackenzie Scott of billions of dollars? I don't know whether it just came out, so I'm not sure, you know, and how she's giving away that money. I mean, it's a vast fortune.
Bezos' wife, former wife?
Bezos' wife, yeah.
Right. I don't know what she's giving the money to. It said she was giving billions of dollars away, but I don't know to what.
Oh, okay. There was some write-up about it. We'll ask that another time or over coffee one day, you know, because extraordinary gift. Yeah. But I mean, we have many more questions that we thought about. Jacob, I don't know, Rabbi, I don't know whether you want to, there's time for questions from the people who are listening or how you want to handle this.
So there's some that have come on the chat. Someone mentioned that AVI CHAI started the advanced Talmud program at Stern College. I guess, Mem, you're aware of that, right?
I'm not only aware of it, but you're sitting with one of the trustees who initiated that project, Lauren Merkin.
Okay.
Very successful project.
That came in. I have a question, Mem. I was surprised that AVI CHAI, you said you invested in Shtisel and you now invested again. So how does that work? Is that philanthropy, or do you get that money back? I mean, I would assume they would go to a venture capitalist, like Lauren said, as opposed to a philanthropist.
Right. No, misunderstanding. When I say invested in, I mean gave the money toward. We haven't made a penny on any of our films, only because it's a different audience. First of all, we didn't put money in to make money. Any money that would have come back into the foundation and would have been spent again.
Of course.
And when the sale went to Netflix, we didn't participate in the funding of that and the profit of that either. But I use the word invest because I kind of think that's what it is. You know, I think we're investing in the Jewish people. So it is a word that I use, and I use it specifically because I think that's what it is. We're not giving money away with no purpose in mind. We're making an investment, and we hope it pans out.
Right. So maybe you don't have to answer if you don't, but when you give money for Shtisel and they're successful, when they give you back what you gave them? Isn't that?
Yes, that would be lovely, but it doesn't happen.
It doesn't work that way in the real world.
No, it doesn't. And not only that, because not only were we novices, but the people we were working with in Israel, you know, we ultimately partnered with the Gesher Film Fund in the hopes that they would carry on our project after we, and then we brought in another partner, the Maimonides Fund. And it's a great partnership. And maybe they will make money going forward because we've learned what not to do. But to this point, we haven't.
Okay, Rabbi, there's one other person on the chat that wants to thank Lauren and you because she graduated from this program in 2004.
Oh, that's nice.
So that's
thank you.
That's
You're
a good.
welcome. Thank you for going to it.
Yeah.
I hope.
Rabbi, do you have any questions, Rabbi, or any insight?
Yes, I just had 2 questions, and thank you so much for a wonderful evening and for everything that you've done for so many years for the Jewish world. Just had 2 questions, one strategic and one more personal. So in terms of the strategic plan that AVI CHAI took, so it seems to me that there are 2 ways to run an endowment. You could spend down, as you mentioned, which is the approach to take, which AVI CHAI took, which means like a greater impact, but a shorter term in terms of length. Or you could just use the interest and the earnings that the money has invested, where you have a smaller impact, but a longer term effect. So just curious, what was the decision making in terms of how to run the endowment and from the strategic perspective?
Well, firstly, the funder, my late husband, had no interest in the foundation going on in perpetuity. He made that quite clear to me and to Arthur. And he had no interest in mission drift, as you see other foundations often go off the derech. And he did not want anyone to spend his money who didn't know him. And so we made the decision that the foundation would have a sunset. And as a foundation, when Arthur and I made that decision, we brought Lauren as the 3rd member in to make, to understand what we wanted to do, and she clearly did. And then we brought it to our trustees, who also agreed, and that's what we did. Now, agreed. Everybody was unanimous in the agreement, but everyone wasn't happy. Some people wanted the foundation to go on forever, and some people thought that because the job that we were doing was so important, it needed to go on. But it wasn't a decision we were prepared to make, and so we made the decision that we did. What did it mean for us? I don't know if you asked me that, but I'm going to tell you anyway. It meant for us that we had to determine how much we could spend over what period of time in order to help our grantees to be strong and continue on after we closed. So they had 10 years notice, and we worked with them in the hopes that when we stopped our funding and our grant making to them, they would be able to go on. And so that is what we did. And I think today, although I think it's premature, of course it's premature because we're only out of business the last year, difficult to know what the outcome will be. But we've seen a lot of success in that many of the grantees that we funded have continued, some of them very successfully. And I think there's a good chance that at the end of the day, we'll be able to look at it and say, we did a good job, a wonderful job. Did we complete the job? No. This is not a job you complete. This is a job you start, you work really hard at, but it's never done. We did the best we could in the period of time we had with the funding that we had.
Thank you. And on a personal note, I was curious, when you look back at your career working for the Jewish community and trying to elevate the Jewish community, if there was one program or one initiative that when you're home at night alone and you're thinking, gives you the most level of satisfaction and joy when you reminisce about the wide array of projects that you worked on?
Absolutely not. I can't, because as I said, it's not a job that's done. So I think we did a good job, and in some places even a great job, but not a complete job. There's nothing that I can close the lid on and say it's finished, nobody ever has to touch this again. It just doesn't work that way. So no, I don't lie back and think, wow, that was great. You know, no, I could look at a film and say that was great. It had a beginning and end. A book, I could say that was great. It had a beginning and end. But no, otherwise I really can't. I'm sorry.
Yeah. You know, I once saw a short clip which I you know, had a profound impact on me. I believe it was an AVI CHAI clip about a Jewish Israeli mother who lost her son when in the plane crash. Are you familiar? It was very, very moving, and I have seen it many times. And for some reason, that particular clip, you know, really stuck with me to give you a glimpse of what Jewish parents go through, Israeli parents go through in Israel. In America, we don't really understand it entirely, but I think it really captured, you know, the challenges that the parents face in Israel.
Sure, I understand.
Ma'am, there was something you said earlier, which I think is important. Maybe it's on the mission statement, but you were saying that your Zalman felt like he wanted to share his positive Jewish experience with the rest of the Jewish world. Did I hear you say that correct? And that was the impetus of starting it?
Yes.
So no, I think that's interesting because, you know, a lot of people have the capacity to help others, but it sounded like that inspiration. You mentioned Rabbi Riskin also, and Rabbi Riskin has, you know, my home, and he's spoken about your husband and their relationship. But no, I think that's very special.
Yeah, I think Rabbi Riskin had a profound effect on Zalman's life. I don't think anyone had more of a profound effect on his life than Rabbi Riskin did. And he's a good friend and a wonderful rabbi and a wonderful human being. I can't say enough about him.
But I think you know, people hopefully who are inspired hopefully will, you know, continue to do great work like you did with God's help.
Let's hope.
And Mem, I think that, you know, you should invite everybody when things are better to drop in at Beit AVI CHAI and look online and maybe just say a word about it's alive and well and functioning.
Yes, Beit AVI CHAI is a cultural center in Jerusalem on, as I think the rabbi mentioned, on the corner of King George and Karen Kayemet streets. And it has programming for all ages, Jewish cultural programming. So everything from films, lectures, art exhibits, music, dance, anything you can think of. And it's a wonderful facility, and it was designed by Ardakami Malamed, who designed the Supreme Court building with her brother. And programming goes on there all of the time. However, once COVID began and we could no longer have people in the building, they took to online programming. And they have been quite successful with it. It'll be interesting to see what happens when COVID ends and people can come out again. But I think for everyone in the business in any business that has gone online, there'll be a whole new perspective about how to service the community, what to do and what not to do, and how many people you can address at one time. So Beit AVI CHAI will go on. It will be funded by AVI CHAI, and please God, it will go on for many, many, many years.
Amen.
In fact, it was the only designated grant my late husband made, was to build Beit AVI CHAI, and we did.
Wonderful. So Mem, I know Lauren and Ezra and everyone promised you an hour. We've gone a little bit over, but you know, I feel like we've just touched the surface in our short discussion this evening. So maybe we'll get you back for a Zoom, or when we have the renovation, maybe we'll get you actually in the building for a Friday night dinner. But you know, I wanted to really thank you for your time this evening, sharing your vast experience to our community and all of us. And I want to thank Ezra and Lauren, of course, for making this happen. And it was really wonderful. Ezra and Lauren, is there anything you guys want to close with?
Nope. Thank you, Jacob. Thank you, Rabbi, very much.
Thank you all very much. Thank you, Lauren. Thank you, Ezra. Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you, Jacob. Thank you. I loved it. It was very interesting and fun for me. Thank you. And I wasn't so nervous.
No, you were great. You were perfect.
Great.
You were so good. We're going to have to get you back.
There you go. Thank you very much. Be well, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Have a good evening. Thank you.